Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. Today, we're unpacking a true medical mystery, one that actually morphs into this incredible story of scientific innovation. We're going to be looking at a groundbreaking clinical trial from the researchers at WashU Medicine. And this trial, it takes on glioblastoma. If you follow oncology at all, you know that is one of the most notoriously aggressive, downright difficult to treat brain cancers out there. The phase 1 results just dropped in the journal Nature Cancer, and honestly, they represent a massive leap forward in how we might finally treat the quote-unquote untreatable. But to really get the impact of this science, we kind of have to start with the human element. Back in June of 2021, Kim Garland, she's a retired school nurse, was volunteering at a youth camp. And out of nowhere, things got weird. She started getting really confused. She was forgetting incredibly obvious things and dealing with these headaches that would just come and go all day. This wasn't just typical brain fog. It was a sudden, genuinely alarming shift in her cognition. So that brings us to part 1 of our explainer, a devastating diagnosis. 4 in 100,000. That's the incidence rate of glioblastoma in the US. And it highlights a pretty brutal reality, because while it's rare, it is incredibly aggressive. It grows unbelievably fast, and right now, it's considered incurable. Typically, standard of care is surgery, followed by chemo and radiation, but historically, the outcomes are just highly discouraging. An ER scan showed exactly what Kim was up against, a 6.5 centimeter mass in her brain. For context, that is roughly the size of a small avocado. But the crucial point here is that this wasn't just any glioblastoma. After they removed it, her doctors realized Kim had an unmethylated MGMT subtype. That's a mouthful, but basically it means this specific tumor is especially tough to beat because it actively resists standard chemotherapy. Which leads us into part 2, why glioblastoma hides. So how exactly do you fight a cancer that's constantly evolving and hiding? That's the core problem, right? Glioblastoma is incredibly smart in an evolutionary sense. Even if you use immunotherapy to attack specific proteins on the cancer cells, the tumor just adapts. It essentially drops those targeted proteins and totally escapes the immune system. It literally changes its disguise. Dr. Tanner Johans, he's the lead author of the study and an oncologist at WashU Medicine, uses a brilliant metaphor for this. He explains that glioblastomas are what oncologists call cold tumors. They create this microenvironment that completely hides from the body's immune system. But the personalized vaccine from this trial, it aims to completely flip the script. The goal is to transform those invisible cold tumors into hot tumors. A hot tumor is highly visible. It essentially rings the alarm bells, making it highly susceptible to being wiped out by the patient's very own immune system. All right, part 3, the personalized DNA vaccine. Let's look at how they actually target these tumor proteins. To really grasp how this works, we need to define one absolutely essential term: neoantigens. Basically, these are unique proteins that are entirely specific to an individual patient's cancer cells. Think of them like biological fingerprints. What's absolutely incredible here is that WashU computational biologists, specifically Dr. O.B. Griffith and Dr. Malachi Griffith, used advanced algorithms to handpick these neoantigens. And to stop the tumor from pulling that disappearing act we talked about earlier, they deliberately selected targets from all over the patient's tumor, not just one spot. And the true superpower of this DNA-based vaccine, which is called GNOSPV01, by the way, really comes down to the number 40. It doesn't just target 1 or 2 proteins. It actually fires up the patient's immune system to hunt down up to 40 unique cancer proteins specific to that single patient's tumor. Guys, that's twice as many targets as previous cancer vaccines have ever even attempted. So if the tumor evolves and drops a couple of targets, doesn't matter. The immune system still has dozens of other targets locked in. So how does this whole process actually work for the patient? It's a fascinating, highly customized loop. First up, right after the initial surgery to take out the tumor, the team identifies those specific neoantigens. Second, they literally engineer a synthetic DNA molecule that encodes the unique blueprint of that patient's tumor. They do all this manufacturing at the Siteman Cancer Center while the patient is recovering from post-op radiation. And then step 3, the injections start. On average, this kicks off about 10 weeks after surgery, with a shot every 3 weeks to keep the immune system on high alert. Okay, let's get to the results in part 4, trial results and hope. The data we're looking at is genuinely remarkable. Look at the historical 1-year survival rate for this specific type of glioblastoma. It sits right around 40%. But in this phase 1 trial, 2/3 of the patients, roughly 66%, made it past that 1-year milestone. Plus, every single participant showed an active immune response, except for one person who was taking an immune-suppressing steroid. And crucially, this is huge, in patients dealing with such an aggressive cancer, this vaccine caused 0 serious side effects. And when we stretch the timeline out to the 2-year mark, things stay incredibly encouraging. 1/3 of the participants, 33%, were still alive after 2 years. For this specific patient population, hitting that number effectively doubles the historical survival expectancy, a real game changer. But, what does all this data actually mean for a real human being? Let's bring it back to Kim Garland. Remember, back in June 2021, she's having those terrifying symptoms at youth camp. Shortly after that, Dr. Albert Kim surgically removes that avocado-sized tumor. 10 weeks post-op, she starts her personalized DNA injections. And today, we're talking almost 5 years later, and she is entirely recurrence-free. Instead of living week to week, she and her husband are booking long-delayed vacations and hanging out with their 15 grandkids. There's a quote from Kim's husband, Scott, that I think perfectly captures the emotional weight of this explainer. He said, "Someday when another person hears the words, 'you have glioblastoma,' maybe they will be told, 'This is the cancer you have, but it is very treatable.'" That right there, that is the whole point. We're talking about the potential to turn a devastating death sentence into a manageable, treatable condition. So it leaves us with this massive question. Will personalized DNA vaccines rewrite glioblastoma from an incurable diagnosis to a treatable one? Well, Dr. Johans and his team are already gearing up for the next steps to test this in a larger group of patients and eventually expand it to all types of glioblastomas. This science is moving at lightning speed, and the very real hope is that customized DNA vaccines won't just be an experimental trial for much longer, but the actual standard of care. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today to explore this breakthrough. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.